Joining me now is Domenico Montanaro. He's the lead political editor at NPR. Domenico, so the call that raises several questions. First of all, the president, he didn't take the advice of advisors. What are you hearing about that?
Well, look, this is pretty typical for President Trump. If you tell him to do something, or that the lawyers won't like it, or that the advisors won't like it, he thinks that it's actually a pretty good thing to go against that because maybe it makes for good drama, or he likes to trust his own instincts to do so. But what's fascinating to me is less the fact that they told him not to do this, but the fact that he did it and that he didn't, talk about American elections being free and fair and being able to raise the prospect of the fact that American democracy is better than Russian autocracy. He didn't take the opportunity as a world leader to be able to say to Vladimir Putin, the American elections are free and fair, Russian elections are different and shouldn't be the way they are. He didn't raise also the prospect of the fact that the Russians are ongoing attacking with cyber attacks, attacking American energy grids, trying to interfere with the U.S. elections still, and didn't raise that prospect. In fact, Sarah Sanders, the press secretary yesterday, said that it didn't come up on this call. And the president in that pool spray yesterday at the White House decided not to talk about that, decided to say that he wasn't going to raise that prospect. Instead, he said that there shouldn't be an arms race with Russia. Really curious stuff, especially considering what past American presidents have done in trying to voice moral leadership throughout the world for democracy and on issues like not just arms, but of course interfering in elections.
Yeah, in addition to all this, we're reportedly hearing that the president was really angry that the details about the call leaked out. Do you think that this hardens his belief that he has staffers who are trying to undermine him? And do you think it could lead to more firings in the White House?
Not this specific incident, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are other people who wind up being cleared out. I mean, I think that that's something everyone's keeping an eye on. We've been keeping an eye on the Justice Department and whether or not he decides to try in a roundabout way to fire Robert Mueller, the special counsel. There's all kinds of calls on Capitol Hill now. We saw from the number 2 in leadership, Kevin McCarthy, the number 3 in Republican leadership, Steve Scalise, call for a second special counsel, get this, to investigate the investigators of the Russia probe. Now, the president says he's not going to do that, or at least the White House says he's not. Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader from Kentucky in the Senate, says Mueller should have the chance to finish the investigation. And Paul Ryan, the House Speaker, is also saying that Mueller should be able to continue his work. But they're not doing anything to provide any kind of leverage or cover for Mueller in this omnibus funding bill that's supposed to be potentially brought up tomorrow to say that there should be protections for Mueller. Now, I understand on the one hand, Republicans don't want to poke the bear and fire up President Trump even more. But on the other hand, it still leaves open the possibility that if President Trump is in a bad mood, he could vent his frustrations in a different way rather than just Twitter. Yeah,
speaking of poking the bear, he tweeted out this morning, Republicans are holding off on legislation to protect Mueller at this point. And today, the Washington Examiner quoted GOP Senator Bob Corker. And he said about the president and the president's Republican base that people don't ask about issues anymore. They don't care about issues. They want to know if you're with Trump or you're not. Is there any concern about surrounding Republicans that by protecting Mueller, they could face backlash potentially in upcoming midterms?
Absolutely. There's no question about that. The fact is, during the 2016 primaries, there was one Republican who ran Marco Rubio's campaign who said that every time they looked at polling, they knew that a significant slice of the pie, about 33% of the Republican electorate, was made of titanium, and it was solidly with Donald Trump. They weren't able to break that away whatsoever. And that's the issue for a lot of the rank-and-file Republicans. The reason you see McCarthy and Scalise behind Paul Ryan saying that they would want a second special counsel is because there are all these rumors on Capitol Hill that Paul Ryan could step aside at some point, maybe get annoyed with the slow pace of legislation on Capitol Hill, and then one of them would have to ascend and want to be in the good graces of President Trump. But what everyone continues to fail to remember is that no matter how hard they try to be in the good graces of President Trump, everyone eventually gets the eye kind of posed at them if they disagree with the president at all. You know, it's a little bit like the Greek mythological story of Icarus. The closer you get to the sun, the more your wings of wax wind up melting, and nobody seems to have learned that lesson in Washington who goes to work for this president.
Yeah, but you know, there is a deadline I do want to also ask you about. Spending deal. Friday's the deadline. Where are we on that government deadline?
Well, it looks like that there's a deal in place, that the Republicans and Democrats have come up with something that, you know, is somewhat piecemeal, but is something they could agree on. An omnibus, meaning that it's all-inclusive, not just a continuing resolution. They may try to bring it up tomorrow, and that may be the first time we see some real details on the spending bill, but we're seeing that there would be some increased funding for border security, which would mostly go to technology. There's also a contentious New York-New Jersey bridge, New York-New Jersey tunnel, a big infrastructure bill that was killed in the last administration by Republicans on Capitol Hill, and by Chris Christie, the Republican governor of New Jersey, who thought that the outlays of that funding bill would, you know, wind up crippling the state of New Jersey and that they would have to spend more money. President Trump is saying that he would veto this piece of legislation if it included that funding. So that could be the one thing that holds us up. We don't know if he'll actually go through with that threat, but this has been a huge issue, especially as we're talking about weather and whether or not people can get, you know, into and out of this kind of main corridor in this you know, in the Northeast, and it's a problem. Anybody who's gone from New Jersey to Manhattan, you know, understands that the infrastructure needs some work, and this would fund some of that. Yeah, a lot of people are passionate about that project and feel like there is a need to invest in that. I want to ask you, though, about something Republicans aren't touching. You know, these growing number of reports that the president had affairs. In just one day, a polygraph showed that Stormy Daniels was truthful about an affair. We have a former playmate who's sued. Karen McDougal filed a lawsuit to speak out about her alleged affair. And then we've got this judge who ruled a defamation suit against the president by a former Apprentice contestant who's accused him of harassment at this point. So you've got these accumulating side stories. How is it impacting how the president can move forward and govern and legislate? Well, first of all, it has to irritate him. It has to frustrate him. And it has to be something that he just looks at and doesn't want to continue to see over and over on TV, dominating the narrative. Now, I read through Stormy Daniels' you know, her real name Stephanie Clifford, the polygraph test that she took. And the thing to me that, you know, look, there's lots of sordid details. There's lots of discussion about, you know, the fact that they had this relationship. But the thing that's more interesting, there's two pieces of this. One, the fact that there was this, you know, $130,000 in essentially hush money to cover this up. But secondly, the fact that within the relationship, Donald Trump at the time was using the leverage of him being the host of The Apprentice to sort of try to lure her into this relationship. It was sort of a promise to say that he could try to get her on The Apprentice. So to take somebody who's famous in her world and try to you know, if she's looking to kind of mainstream herself, she maybe sees Donald Trump as a way to do that. And that's how he's using this to create this relationship while, by the way, he's married. Now, would any of this stick? Who knows, right? There were tons of women, you know, a dozen women or more who came out during the 2016 campaign to say that the president had, then the candidate, that he had harassed them or sexually assaulted them or was accusing him of sexual misconduct, put their names on the record, something that in normal times, putting your name on the record would be the thing that made people believe them. But because of that partisanship we've been talking about, whether you're with or against this president, you know, a lot of his supporters just either didn't believe them or didn't care. A lot to unpack on that one as well. Domenico Montanaro, thank you so much for joining us. Hey, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.